musical, linguistic objects.
Greetings from Psychedelic Space. This is Lorenzo, and I'm your host here in the Psychedelic Salon. And you may be wondering where I've been these past 3 weeks, but, well, I wish there was some kind of an exciting tale to tell you, but the truth is that I've just been sort of lounging in the land of lethargy. In other words, I've just been goofing off, kind of pretending that I'm on a summer vacation at the beach and doing a lot of reading and not much else. As I've said before, I want these podcasts to be something that I do for fun and not because I feel like I have to do one each week. And so now I'm refreshed and ready to have some more fun with you here in the salon once again. But while I've been goofing off, some of our fellow saloners have been kind of nudging me back to the world by either buying a copy of my Pay What You Can novel, The Genesis Generation, or by making direct donations to the salon. And yes, I guess that my childhood years in Catholic school have still left a trace of guilt in me, and I've begun to feel guilty about not getting around to thanking what has turned out to be a lot of our fellow saloners who were worried that the podcasts were going away. But never fear, I'm planning on keeping these things going for at least through the end of 2013 or so. In fact, as a sign of good faith, I'm not going to thank all of the donors from the past 3 weeks right now. Instead, I'm going to put out another podcast tomorrow, sort of a double album podcast or something, and I'll thank the rest of you then. So thanks for the support goes out to the following people who kind of gave me a boost to get back into podcasting mode. And these fine souls are Graham W., Chris T., Eric S., Sophia N., Stella Luna, Lee M., Dylan H., Dominic B., Mark M., and to longtime listeners, Robert and Roby, or it could be Robin, and I'm not complaining about your handwriting, Robin. It's still orders of magnitude better than mine, so I hope I got that kind of right. And also, one more big thank you goes out to a fellow saloner from Canada who sent a note that really gave me a rush because he signed it with his first name and last initial, which are Joe H. And that was how my dad was known when he was still alive. So, hey, Joe, thanks a lot for both the donation and for the feel-good moment your letter gave me when I saw Joe H. there. And now, as they say, let's get on with the show. Today I'm going to play two talks that I've wanted to get out to you for a while, but just never seemed to get around to them. The first talk I'm going to play right now is somewhat of an informal session and more of a question and answer session, I guess, that Ann Shulgin led just after one of Sasha's talks at the 2001 Entheobotany Conference in Palenque, Mexico. As you'll hear, the Palenque sessions were generally small, informal, and full of interesting information, much of which came from the audience. Unfortunately, very little of the audience comments were clear enough in the recording to include in this podcast, as the recording was done on the little cassette recorder that Matt Palomari had with him at the time. And hey, thanks again for the recording, Mateo. So I had to cut out some of the audience parts where I couldn't amplify them satisfactorily. And if you happen to be one of the people whose words of wisdom didn't make it into this program, and you were at that workshop, well, you're in somewhat good company, as I've even edited my own kind of long-winded contribution out of this talk as well. But in the case of my comments, you can trust me, you aren't really missing anything of importance. And so now let's rewind our clocks a little more than 10 years and go back and join Ann Shulgin and a few of us having a conversation about psychedelic safety, among other interesting topics.
Is to share experiences, for you to share experiences that might be of help to other people. We'll bring up questions about states of consciousness, whether drug assisted or not. Questions that someone else might have answers to. And no subject, as far as I'm concerned, is too weird. I personally am interested in lucid dreaming and in the whole UFO phenomenon. and just about everything else involving human consciousness. To be fair to everybody, it would be a nice idea if you can keep your story, whatever you want to call it, to about 5 minutes, because otherwise a few people will have all the time and some people will get no time. Discussion, however, is, unlimited time. The first thing, if you feel a little hesitant to claim that a certain thing happened to you, then you can always use the favorite internet expression of, FOAF, a friend of a friend, had this happen. It doesn't matter. There is one thing I'd like to talk about briefly. It came up last night. Last year, for the first time, we had one person who experienced this unexpected side effect. And this year, I think one or two others had the same thing happen last night. Last year, there was a compound that was floating around called 2CT7. And everybody had approximately the same dosage level. Almost everybody seemed to want to try it. Very successful, except for one person who's not here this year, who had a terribly hard time. He almost collapsed up at the ruins, and it took far longer for him to get back to baseline than it should have. It was extremely intense, very uncomfortable, and we couldn't figure out what had happened until he happened. We asked him what drugs in general he took, and he was one of those people who had gotten into so-called smart drugs. Turned out that he was taking daily Deprenyl, and we concluded that the Deprenyl was the problem. Now, this year, Sasha and I didn't know who was taking anything, if anything, until after they'd taken it, and at least two people came up to us and made clear that they were not only having an extremely intense experience, but it was too intense. It had been going on far longer than this particular drug, which shall remain unnamed because it's not legal. This is a relatively short-acting psychedelic, and a couple of them had been going for 8-10 hours, which is very unusual. And it was not comfortable. It was obviously an overdose. One of them turned out to have been a user of Deprenyl as part of his daily vitamin supplement stuff. And I very much suspect the second one was also doing that. So I would suggest, I told Sasha that this information should go out immediately onto Arrowwood and those sites. And he said it probably already is. But nobody's been paying enough attention. I think the rule should probably be, for those of us who are not chemists and don't know whether we're taking a phenethylamine or what, that if you are going to experiment with a psychedelic of any kind, make sure you are Deprenyl free for at least 5 days. Probably 7 would be safer. Now, has anybody here had this kind of experience? Anyone here using Deprenyl has discovered this particular effect?
So Ethylamine and Deprenyl are the same, just different names, and some people know one and the other. And then meclobamide is another that's available in Mexico, and an MAO inhibitor that people use to potentiate.
Well, the idea of potentiating it sounds all fine, except that I've yet to come across anyone that this happened to who was enjoying it.
Well, you don't mix it with phenylethylamines and certain things, or else you get into trouble. You use it with tryptamines, and you have to be careful how you do it.
All right. Well, would it be sensible just to say that maybe it's better if you're taking Depronil to drop the Depronil for 5 days? Okay. Yeah, that's a good warning. And I'm sure it must be on these various sites, but if you find out that it isn't, please take the responsibility of making sure that the sites concerned with psychedelic drugs do have that information, because it can be rather unpleasant. I don't know if the audience includes people who are having trouble. Probably not. I assume that there are no serious after effects of any kind, because last year the gentleman who was having all that trouble was perfectly fine the next day. But it's not the happiest experience. Okay, I'm going to bring up the first subject, which has come up with several people, and it comes up every year. And I don't have an answer myself, but I think it might be a good idea for especially the therapists to perhaps try to get together before the end of the seminar and see what ideas they can come up with and work out. The problem is the oldest one, and that is how do you find not only a reliable source of a material that you want to do therapeutic work with as a client, and second, how do you find a therapist who will do this kind of work with you? I don't have an answer because this entire matter of therapy using psychedelics or MDMA is underground, and it's a felony, as I'm sure you all know. But it still is going on. The only suggestion I have about how to discover these people is you have to go very slowly and very carefully, assuming that most people that you ask direct questions of are going to wonder if you are an undercover agent, and they should be asking themselves that. I think that any therapist who might be open to doing this kind of work will probably want to work with you at least 6 months in ordinary therapy first. The only way I can think of to get around the danger to the therapist is that if you know a therapist who might be open to working with one of these materials, you could ask her, let's say, if I came for a session and I happen to have ingested a certain substance I like to work with just before I came in here, would it be all right with you if we made this a longer than usual session? Would you be open to the idea? Now, the tricky thing is that if you mention the particular drug, you're putting the therapist on the spot. If you indicate that it is something that may not be entirely legal, but that it is a very good insight drug, for instance, the therapist, I think, and correct me if there are lawyers here who don't agree, the therapist, if the actual drug name is not mentioned, might be able to legally say, yes, I can do that, without being put on the spot and endangering themselves legally. But that's about as close as I can imagine getting to a sort of semi-answer about this. But if it was suggested to me earlier that the therapists in this audience really should get together and exchange information. And having been at this particular conference It doesn't guarantee that you're a safe person, but there would be a little less paranoia about it. So I think that's as close as I can come. Does anyone here have any other suggestions about doing this? Is there anyone with any legal training who would like to add precautions or cautionary things about going about this? I think it's like any underground. It's like trying to get to the underground fighting the Nazis in World War II. I mean, you don't just say, by the way, is there anyone around here that belongs to the underground? Otherwise, I don't know if the internet is much of a help here, because there's so much. Anyone can be on the internet, and
anybody you talk to is on the internet.
Right, yeah, it's not good. Okay. There's a lot of research in Switzerland, but that doesn't help someone in Minnesota. The research that's starting up in Israel and in Europe is really great. It's very reassuring. But there are therapists doing this kind of work underground in this country. I'm always asked after any lecture, where can I find one? And my honest answer is I don't have the slightest idea.
I have one thing to interject.
Yeah.
We know this one therapist who is doing transpersonal work or getting ready to do it, and his chemical of choice is ketamine. And because he's a medical doctor and he's done certain work with ketamine, he can legally give people ketamine. And he claims that ketamine, you'll have a very profound experience, et cetera, et cetera. But that's one possibility.
Yeah, you happen to push one of my favorite buttons. Ketamine, I know that those who have used ketamine successfully, whether in therapy or self-exploration or whatever, swear by it. My own attitude, frankly, toward ketamine is extremely negative. I think it's a very dangerous drug. I don't think anything is dangerous once or twice. I may be wrong about that too, but in general, I think you could take almost anything 2 or 3 times. But ketamine, I've seen some long-lasting results of chronic ketamine usage, which are so horrifying. I could tell you stories about that, but I'll just say, okay, ketamine for therapy, I would be extremely careful, and I'd do a lot of asking questions of the therapist. Does the therapist know the horror stories, which are true? How does the therapist feel about, how many times did he expect to use the ketamine with you? And I would just be very cautious about it. But
both personally and therapeutically, and used it for a 2-year period personally, and I don't know, maybe I have ill effects, maybe I don't, none that I've been able to put my finger on, but I felt that it provided me significant benefits in my life. Then I had a difficult patient, and who had been getting treatment from me and a number of other sources over a period of years, a young woman, a serious disturbance, but I really could never put my finger on it. And since I had had such a positive experience with ketamine, I consulted with a friend who was also deeply involved with ketamine and used it therapeutically with her, a series of, because it lasts about 30, 40 minutes, a series of ketamine experiences that did not have an adverse effect that I know of, I can say, but I'm not sure that we really accomplished anything more than what had occurred prior to.
Yeah, I'd just like to interject that individual psychiatrist is more interested in helping people see God and things like that than he is working out their personal problems.
Okay, so in other words, it's what you might call spiritual work, not so much personal psychological work. Okay, that's valid. Okay.
I wanted to say I've spoken with several neurologists and very knowledgeable doctors about ketamine, and one of the long-term effects of ketamine is it inhibits something, I believe it's called glutamine transferase, and glutamine is a recently discovered neurotransmitter that deals with human observation of time. And that's why when you take ketamine, you feel in a timeless space. It's very interesting. And at least for me, in my experience, I think that the horror stories mostly come in with people who use it intramuscularly or injected in any way because it's direct route to the brain. I mean, that's just like with chili and all those things.
Yeah, okay.
And I use the Lilly technique in the sense that you use small amounts over periods of time, timed intervals, and you bring yourself to a higher point than you would if you took, say a large amount, went up and then back down. And you use less, so there's less long-term damage. But I don't think anyone really knows about the damage.
Yeah.
But it is short-term, from what I understand. So long as you don't use it chronically, there is no long-term damage.
Okay, because the people I'm thinking of were injecting every 15 minutes. And the worst is that they neither of them ever could acknowledge the fact that they were hooked on it at all. They always expressed it as a preference. I'd rather be in this state. They were absolutely unable to recognize, which is not, that rare, I suppose, with addictions, but they couldn't see it. John Lilly and another, because I've seen John Lilly, at least he was functioning. There's a lady who, one of our dear friends, and she wrote one of the most successful books in the 60s, very famous, and she's a terrific lady, very brilliant. She got a $1 million contract to write a second book. She got into ketamine. She had to eventually give back the $1 million because she wasn't getting anywhere writing. She had a supplier who was, I think, either dentist or doctor. Her friends did an intervention, threatened the supplier with God knows what. And that worked for a while. She got back, she went off it for quite some time, got back into it. The last time I saw this brilliant and creative person was a couple of months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, and her hair was unwashed. A friend of mine who's very acute noticed that her nails were dirty. She couldn't really properly complete a sentence. And she's wrecked. And my feelings, I have to admit, I am really prejudiced against this drug because of the kind of damage it does that seems to last long after they maybe have given it up. They still have strange quirks in their thinking. They cannot think clearly. So I would just urge you to be very careful. Somebody else had a hand up on it. Yeah.
And I wanted to make a comment about the therapy question, about seeking someone out.
Yeah.
I don't mean to dismantle the concept or question the concept of therapy in general, but I'd like to say my feeling on this is that isn't this what our friends are for? Like, you don't need to do this out of I shouldn't say you don't need to, but I'm testing the idea of not having a community and a family and a friendship network that's strong enough to trip with your friends and work through your personal or spiritual journey.
Oh, easy. We have a terrific one in the Bay Area in Northern California. There is a terrific network, as you know. But I was talking to somebody who lives in Minnesota, and there are a lot of people here who live in different states where I'm sure there are groups, but he hasn't found the group yet. And if you've just moved to a new place, how do you find?
If you find the material to do, and you have friends, maybe they don't do it, but to have somebody that will talk with you, or whatever is the concept of therapy, or just do it yourself.
Okay, yeah.
Like
Well, yeah, but still, there is a great deal of good, successful work done when you have a guide, or a therapist or lay therapist guide who's good and who can, do shadow work with you or something like that. Shadow work is very hard to do by yourself. Yeah, okay. If you live in a place and you've lived in a place long enough to have formed a network of friends, I don't think you've got the problem. But again, it would be good for the therapists in this group to get together and see if they can share information that might be of use. Yeah.
I think that the idea of therapy with a small group of friends that is in a more serious context, very small, like 2 to 3 people per group, I think that that's the only way that the underground therapeutic movement can really move on, because, like you were saying, there's no way to reliably find a therapist who's trained. So, I mean, you need to take the people who are being the lay therapists and just let them understand the basic concepts of psychoanalysis, or at least this has been my experience. It's worked very well. And then have them work with other people with,
yeah, right.
Like that, and just work through things. And I think you'll find that each person has their own, in the group, has their own therapeutic value.
Yes, that's true. Yes, far back.
Like what you're saying, that there's family that is really important. But I think for a lot of people that talking about these issues to friends, it can be very demanding on friends. And because you're with people you know, like a partner or family, it can sometimes be really hard to open up to those feelings. You might involve those.
Yeah.
And in relation to that being an untrained therapist working, or like a friend working with a patient or client, or whatever you want to call it, without having the training, because having gone through like 4 years in university, where you learn loads of things, and having read all these brilliant works that's been written about the interpretation of these visions, because as you might all have known, these visions are not like a little dwarf coming out and saying, oh, this and this and this is your dark side, and this and this and this is what you're going to do to sort it out.
Yeah.
It was like that. But we all know that these visions can be really tricky.
Yeah.
It's like, and you need to go in and look at them from like an interpretatory aspect, like Groff and Freud and Stephen talking about, and especially Jung, the archetypes.
Right.
And you might think yourself like a huge spider, or huge spider, you think, what is that got to do with anything? And then when you work with a therapist, and you know the story of the patient, you might see the bigger picture, and you might be able to point and say, oh right, that there is the symbolism. And without the training, it can be hard.
Yeah, I agree very much. I think if
that barrier and it's too hard, then you use the tools that you've been given, and that can be ecstasy, it can be LSD, it can be the drugs here.
Yeah, I'd like to add my own a favorite tool, which I think is fully equivalent to any drug that ever come across, and that's a hypnosis. You find a good hypnotherapist, and they can help you unlock exactly the same doors. And in our network, we don't think about that very much. But I worked with a hypnotherapist when I was doing therapy, and I have immense respect for what can be done. Again, you've got to choose the right person. You've got to be able to feel affinity for them, and they for you. But that goes for any therapy. But I think you don't really need MDMA or a psychedelic to do this sort of work. There are people who say, well, I can't be hypnotized, or I can't work with it. I don't know. Maybe that really is so. But I think that until these, at least, some of these materials become legal, don't dismiss the possibilities of hypnotherapy doing exactly what you need and want.
Well,
Yeah.
the legal ones like 2CT7 and all those, why aren't those, can they be used or not?
Yeah, I would think that, of course, there is as far as I'm concerned, no substitute for MDMA, because it is the insight drug, and it does that magical combination of allowing you to see inside without, fear and hostility toward yourself. I mean, it's beautiful, beautiful effect. And no other drug that we know of so far manages to do that. Any other drug come close? Has anybody had an experience with any other drug that is close?
I was lucky enough to have a personal experience with methyl J, and I found it very similar without some of the downsides.
Oh, what is methyl J? Sasha, help.
It's a homolog. Carbon longer. Is it legal? It's not illegal.
Not illegal. Okay. What was your experience? Did you use it for yourself or with patients?
It was just a personal experience, and it was a little shorter, perhaps a little smoother and easier, and I liked it. I found it very more similar than different.
Okay.
The alpha methyl group, someone asked about the alpha ethyl tryptamine. Yeah, the ethyl group on the alpha position. This is, in essence, is MDMA with an alpha ethyl group on the alpha carbon. But there's a homolog on the alpha group.
Is it relatively easy to make?
Unfortunately, that's where this tape cut off, and I haven't been able to locate any tapes that might have the continuation of this talk on it. But if it shows up someday, I'll certainly be sure to play it for you. However, in reference to the part we just heard, if you'll recall that early in her presentation, Anne mentioned the Palenque conference the year before when some of us tested some 2CT7. Well, if you want to know more of the details about that experiment, you can read more or less an informal report of that experiment on the arrowid.org website. And I'll put a link to it in the program notes for this podcast. And I'll leave it up to you to figure out which of the participant quotes in that report were mine. Also, as a historical side note, the report of that experiment was written by Casey Hardison, who, as you know, is now one of the more prominent prisoners of the war on drugs, with still over 700 days left to serve in a UK prison cell. And if you hear this, Casey, we want you to know that you have a world of support out here, and we look forward to you being a free man once again. Now let's get on to the second talk in today's program, which is one of the talks that was given at the Breaking Convention, a multidisciplinary conference on psychedelic consciousness that was held at the University of Kent in the UK this past April. And I happen to know that many of the organizers and participants in that event are also fellow saloners. So greetings and blessings to you all, and thank you all ever so much for being part of that important event. Now, the talk I'm going to play right now was sent to me by a fellow podcaster, the man behind the wonderful Shroom with a View podcast, and whose name I'm not sure I'm supposed to say, or maybe it was another podcaster who wants to remain anonymous, but just in case, I'll just thank Shroom with a View for this talk without giving his other names. And at the same time, also let you know that almost all of the rest of the talks from this conference are available over at www.shroomwithaview, SHROOM with a view, all one word, shroomwithaview.com, and it's in the archive for podcasts 25 to 49. In fact, you'll also find a lot of other programs there that I think you'll want to check out. And also now he's being carried on the dopefiend.co.uk network, and it's, as you know, the premier podcast network of the tribe. So twice a month you can catch another of Shroom's great programs over there. Now, the talk we're about to hear was given by Dr. William Rowlandson, who you will hear is also a fellow saloner and who is co-director of the Center for the Study of Myth. And the talk he gave that we're now going to hear is titled Borges and McKenna, Iconoclasm, Boundary Dissolution, and Living Symbolically.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a tremendous pleasure and honour to be here. This is a tremendous gathering of people. I've got some great precedents today of the speakers that have come before me, and some beautiful nuggets of information and ideas that we've had over the course of this morning and of yesterday. One little bit that really sang out to me was Ivan, I don't know if he's still here, Ivan, very good on, talking about the plants having a voice. This to me is a perfect introduction to the area that I'll be talking about today, which is about understanding reality symbolically, understanding that reality actually communicates with us as much as we communicate with reality, with our surroundings. What I'm going to be talking about, I don't know if any of you will be a little bit alarmed at seeing Terence McKenna and Luis Borges placed together in the same paper. I think it works very well, and I'll explain a little bit about this. I've heard over the course of this, over today and yesterday, various people saying things such as, I've been smoking cannabis since I was 14, or I've been taking LSD since I was 15. Well, in my case, I've been reading Borges since I was 15, and I think that has been more of a groundbreaking and culture-breaking activity than probably any amount of LSD. It can be equated to that. So I'd recommend Borges is not for the faint-hearted. I certainly agree with that. And I've been reading Terence McKenna and listening to Terence McKenna since a fateful morning walking up to university with Cameron, and he mentioned something about the time wave theory, and that was a number of years ago. And although I held the two in fairly separate compartments of my mind, it all came together with one of Lorenzo Haggerty's podcasts, in which the tremendous author Tom Robbins, and I don't know if anyone's read Tom Robbins, but those who haven't, I recommend Tom Robbins. Tom Robbins and Terence McKenna were rapping together, and they talked about Borges. And I was blown out of my chair with this, because there are three people whom I held very dear to my heart. Tom Robbins, Terence McKenna, and there they are talking about Borges. So it the whole thing came together. But of course it comes together much more than that, and this is what I'm going to explain today. And in fact, I'm not going to speak very much. I'm going to read various quotes. I'm going to do a sort of a funny patchwork affair today of elements, quotes of Terence, and Terence, who's the anniversary of his death today. So may he be enjoying his experience with the machine elves. Right now, he's probably looking down upon us now. He's probably sitting somewhere. But in particular, I'm going to be bringing out elements of Terence, which I think are fairly often overlooked. His extraordinary work as a scholar of literature, his reading of Gnosticism, his reading of alchemy, his understanding of, for example, John Dee, the Elizabethan alchemist and magician, the English Elizabethan alchemist, his reading of James Joyce, in particular Finnegan's Wake, his amazing ability to read and assimilate and bring into the same symbolic dimension his reading of different authors and different magicians and different philosophers. And I realise, of course, it's very similar to the whole drive of Borges, not to write as a reader, and Borges as an explainer of his own reading, his own incredibly extensive bibliographic reading. I see that they're actually very similar. They have this incredible ability to remember huge passages and to bring together in this wonderful patchwork, which for Borges I would place under this loose term known as mysticism, and for McKenna I put in this loose term, and I mean loose term, known as psychedelics. But of course, as I hope to explain, mysticism and psychedelia, or psychedelics, are actually two different words to explain what's essentially the very similar conceptual understanding of the universe. So I'm going to shut up a little bit and let them talk. I think the first thing to say that I find present in both Terence and in Borges is the articulation of this astonishing paradox, which is probably at the heart of a lot of what we are doing here today and yesterday. And that paradox is the ceaseless, constant drive to understand something that is inherently ununderstandable. Now, of course, that the paradox lies in the fact that we understand that it's not to be understood, and yet we understand that we continue to try to understand. It's a beautiful paradox, because of course you are presented with the obvious situation of saying, well, if it's ineffable, if it's unexplainable, and if it's ununderstandable, then I may as well just give up and go and watch daytime telly. But of course we don't. That's why we're here today. And so when we come to the essential riddle of existence and the riddle of the universe, this extraordinary paradox of attempting to understand, knowing that the ultimate answer to the riddle of existence will never be answered. And I can read some quotes here. Like I said, I'll let them speak rather than me. Here's a quote from Borges. If life's meaning were explained to us, he said, in Spanish, but I'm reading English, we probably wouldn't understand it. To think that a man can find it is absurd. We can live without understanding what the world is or who we are. The important things are the ethical instinct and the intellectual instinct, are they not? The intellectual instinct is the one that makes us search while knowing that we are never going to find the answer. And Terence, and I won't try and do his crazy Alpin accent, Terence, here's a lovely quote from this podcast, and I don't think he called it this, or Lorenzo called it this, but it's called Nature, which I think is lovely. Living psychedelically, says Terence, is trying to live in an atmosphere of continuous unfolding of understanding, so that every day you know more and see into things with greater depth than you did before. What we get from this also is the understanding that the world is essentially a riddle. And there's a lovely little quote here I have from Borges when he was 80 years old, these series of interviews he did when he was 80. And he says, I think of the world as a riddle, he says. And the one beautiful thing about it is that it cannot be solved. But of course, I think the world needs riddles. I feel amazement all the time. And he actually goes into the explanation of the word amazement, the English word amazement, which he thinks is better than the Spanish word asombro, because it has maze within it. So therefore you're already entering a maze by the use of the word amazement. Whereas asombro has shadow, sombra, within it. So you're sort of lost in this lack of understanding in both cases. Now what this also leads to is something which will be very familiar to any readers or listeners of Terence, and any readers of Borges, which is this sense of a rejection of dogma, a sense that belief with a capital B is itself a highly problematic mode of thought, because belief with a capital B necessarily excludes other lines of thought. So therefore, moving away from rigid doctrine, moving away from dogma, is the opening up of a greater sense of tolerance for other lines of thought. And I found this beautifully articulated in Borges as well. And he uses the word agnostic, but agnostic here, well, I'll let him explain. He says, being an agnostic means all things are possible, even God, even the Holy Trinity. This world is so strange that anything may happen, or may not happen. Being an agnostic makes me live a larger, a more fantastic kind of world, almost uncanny. It makes me more tolerant. Now, I guarantee that you cannot have listened to anything of Terence without hearing him repeat that phrase that he uses all the time, which is that the universe is not more weird than we imagine, it's more weird than we can imagine. So again, we've got this similar perspective of the aesthetic joy and the epistemological value of bafflement, of puzzlement, of mystification. That itself is of great, as I say, great epistemological value. So, with this idea of belief, Terence then brings this into this well-known expression. You can see these as little sort of brief YouTube clips of culture being not your friend, because culture being, it's related interestingly to the question that Ollie just raised earlier, the idea that culture actually being a defining boundary, the defining imposition of boundaries. And of course, as we all know, Terence spends a lot of time expressing the idea that psychedelics are boundary dissolving. And there's a lovely little quote that I have here about belief. This is from Terence. Much of the problem of the modern dilemma, he says, is that direct experience has been discounted, and in its place all kinds of belief systems have been erected. You see, if you believe something, you are automatically precluded from believing its opposite. Now, we're often taking quite a hard line in there, but he's also quite an iconoclast, so he probably derive great joy from saying such things. And another thing that Terence says, which I think is, again, absolutely beautiful. Cultures, he says, that have habitually broken down the cultural illusion and examined the terrifying reality beyond it have not marched off then to pontificate with the religions of absolutism or scientific absolutism or the rest of it. Why is that? It's because cultures are virtual realities made of language. And if there is one thing psychedelics do, whether you hate them or love them, whether you don't give a hoot, what they do is they dissolve boundaries. The boundaries between you and the floor, between you and your friend, between you and last week, between you and next week. And they dissolve boundaries. That's what they do. That is ultimately subversive behaviour. And again, this perhaps is a link to Caroline's talk earlier of the subculture, the subcultural dimension, because of course, until the subculture has been commodified, that subculture is operating with the objective, to a certain degree, of breaking down some of the imposed boundaries of the hegemonic culture. And as Ollie asked, until it becomes commodified as a new cultural norm. That's what psychedelics do, says Terence. They teach you, we do it this way, don't go there. Sorry, that's wrong. That's what cultures do. Cultures are boundary-defining engines. That's what they do. They teach you, we do it this way. Don't go there. In your mind, in your heart. Follow the rules. Follow the rules. Cultures are like operating systems. At and at will do. They set up a stelae in the centre of the marketplace. And on the stelae they carve the laws. These were the laws of the operating system called 1.0. And that worked fine for a while. Now we're operating under Clinton's second term 4.0. And is it limiting? I mean, actually, we could think of this as a Hillary Clinton perhaps, although he was talking in the 1990s. The same things apply. And is it limiting? Is it idiotic? Is it a pain in the rear end? You bet it is. So that's a very common feature of people's reading of Terence, and also of Borges, of the idea of breaking down the rigidly maintained barriers that belief systems, especially cultural belief systems, have set up around us. And this in itself can be expressed through the term of being iconoclastic. Now, I think we can. There are more ways we can look at this, and this is, I think, a very important one here as well. And this is coming from an idea that Terence explains about the ethical dimension, and I do think this is important. If psychedelics don't secure a moral community, says Terence, then I don't see what the point of it is. Otherwise, we're just another cult. I think that's incredibly powerful words. That there is the need, and again it is linked to this idea of culture and subculture. There is a need to derive value and meaning, as opposed to simply setting up a new cultural form which will stand in some kind of opposition to a more dominant cultural form. That's to say, there needs to be the expression of meaning and of understanding from the experience. And of course, as Terence was at great pains to explain, one's meaning derives not from one's faith in belief systems, but from the felt presence of immediate experience, from what you experience. Now here, I'll start to enter this symbolic world. Borges explains on many occasions that the experience of reading, the experience of dreaming, the experience of nightmare, the experience of imagination is as real as the experience of, for example, a tangible empirical activity. And indeed he says that he knew London far better from reading Chesterton than when he did when he went there. Well, as it was, he was blind when he went there, so it's hardly surprising. But in any respect, his experiences, as he says, of the dream world are of as great an importance in his whole cultural development and his whole personal development as his experience of any let's say, material engagement with reality. Indeed, he wouldn't even make this distinction between a material and an imaginal. The two are perfectly equated. And this is of great importance, and I think this is of great importance. This refers me back to a conversation I had with Cameron before, which comes to the idea that if we look at medical and scientific explanations of psychedelic experiences, there might be, for example, an expression such as the effects of X last for between 5 and 7 hours, or between 3 and 5 hours, or between 7 and 8 minutes, whatever it may be. Now, my feeling that perceiving the world on a more symbolic basis, we start to become in tune with the fact that the effects actually don't last just 5 to 8 hours, they actually last your lifetime. Because they actually will help you change your perspective on how you relate with your surroundings. But it's more than that as well. It's also about how your surroundings relate with you. And here this brings up the whole issue of Jung and synchronicity, and how the relationship between psychedelic experiences and synchronicity are of great importance, and that we should be attuned to that. We should be attuned to the idea that within the psychedelic experience and beyond the psychedelic experience, and I wouldn't say out of, because that's what I'm arguing, that there isn't necessarily an out of. It is an understanding that events transpire within reality which are as meaningful to us as the dream world, for example, as the literature that we're reading, the books we're reading. So there's a lot more I can say about this. There's much more I can say about this. I'm just trying to think about how to wrap this one up now. Essentially, the way to bring this together, is for me this conflation of mysticism and psychedelics and psychedelic experience is, I find, of great importance here. Now, of course, we've got one of the works that I've been engaged in the last few months is Borges' reading of Swedenborg. Swedenborg, who was a mystic who travelled to the angelic world and talked with angels. Now, Borges places great value upon Swedenborg and upon Swedenborg's journeys. And as the same is true of, for example, Rick Strassman's assessment of the interactions that people have on DMT with the entities, or the machina, as Terence calls them. Now, of course, although, as Graham Hancock has done, and probably he'll talk about this afternoon, there is there's a whole body of literature which is looking at this relationship between mysticism and psychedelia. The important thing there is the fact of the psychedelic society, as Terence calls it. The psychedelic society is not the society in which everyone is loaded on DMT 24 hours a day at all. And indeed, neither is it the society where, as Russ Bingley said earlier, where, for example, everyone smokes the herb at all. But it's the society which gives value to the experiences of those who do. And it's a society that gives value to the encounters that people have, and the learning that people engage with under these experiences. And of course, this again relates to the various conversations we've had about drug policy and the law, because one of the key features of drug policy is giving no value to those experiences, suggesting that such experiences are worthless. Now, of course, in the same way that we can give value to the experiences, let's say, of William Blake or Emanuel Swedenborg, as I've been reading in Borges, in the same way that the psychedelic society, as Terence calls it, would be the community that gives value to those experiences. I'm going to end there because I could just keep rambling for ages.
You're listening to the Psychedelic Salon, where people are changing their lives one thought at a time.
I have to admit that when in the beginning of his talk, William mentioned an old podcast I did that featured Terence McKenna and Tom Robbins, well, I was really quite surprised because out of all the podcasts I've done, that one by far has the very worst sound quality. And the truth is that I've always felt it was a mistake for me to include it in the salon, particularly since I received several emails saying that they couldn't make it out at all. In fact, whenever I think of that podcast, I consider removing it from the listing of podcasts simply due to the quality of the sound. But now that I've heard how it affected William one morning, I realize that I should quit second-guessing myself and just let it be. And by the way, the podcast he was referring to is number 151 and is titled Posthumous Glory, which refers to a comment that Terence made during that talk in which he said something to the effect of, posthumous glory, that's where the action is. And that took everybody by surprise, Terence included. It was actually kind of funny when he said it because as the words were coming out of his mouth, you could kind of see it beginning to dawn on him that he was talking about himself. And, a hush began to descend on the room, which Terence immediately dispelled by breaking into one of those big laughs he always had at his own expense. It was really a rare moment, and quite frankly is the main reason I included that talk in the podcast. Now, I realize that my reasons for including one talk or another may not have anything to do with the reasons why you or another fellow saloner might like it or not, as the case may be. But getting back to William's talk just now, I'm so glad that I got to hear it, as he has really helped me gain an even deeper appreciation of Terence McKenna's work. In fact, I'm going to get to work on a new McKenna podcast right now, and so I'll do my best to get that out to you tomorrow. So, for now, I guess I'd better close and remind you that this and most of the podcasts from the Psychedelic Salon are freely available for you to use in your own audio projects under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 3.0 license. And if you have any questions about that, just click the Creative Commons link at the bottom of the Psychedelic Salon webpage, which you can get to via psychedelicsalon.us. And if you are interested in some of the stories that may or may not have led you and me to where we are sharing this moment right now, you can read a few of them in my novel, The Genesis Generation, which is available in Kindle format and other ebook formats, as well as a Pay What You Can audiobook that's read by me. And you can find out more about that at genesisgeneration.us. And for now, this is Lorenzo signing off from Cyberdelic Space. Be well, my friends.